discerning compassionate action, again, as you guys all really pointed to, many of you saying it's kind of the key, I don't say the key, but it's a key component to what we describe and why we call this a praxis, right? So it's integration of theory and action. Essentially, we believe that compassion culminates in restorative action, that without action, compassion devolves into sentimentality. We feel bad for someone else's pain, but ultimately we abandon them to fend for themselves. So compassion actions must serve and sustain our own healing and our own restoration, right? In this process, this is a part of self-compassion that's important. And in the same way, compassionate action also invites and serves the healing and restoration of others. Compassionate action means you do not dehumanize, right, someone else, even though you dislike what they're doing. And we're going to talk about the challenges that this actually presents when we're talking about race, or really about any kind of discrimination, right? But this non-dehumanizing is fundamental, because ultimately to allow some kind of dehumanizing principle to exist is to essentially create a slippery slope where someone eventually could justify dehumanizing you. And so in this sense, compassionate action, again, it sustains yourself, it invites everyone into healing and restoration of themselves. And practicing racial resilience and anti-racism in like an internally way gives rise to racial resilience externally, right? So our process is an internal beginning to an external output, right? And so as such, compassionate actions in this sense don't need to be, as we're all moving towards discerning what we want to do at the end of this program, you don't have to think of what Seth likes to refer to as like the Mount Everest of actions, or the Mount Everest of feelings. You don't have to think, well, the only way I can really tackle anti-racism or tackle racism in my community is to, get my, pastor or the person in charge of my church to adopt a 1 year long anti-racism like preaching agenda or something like that. I mean, that would be great, but that may be substantially difficult in the short term. Rather, we say it's about the everyday actions that you do to ultimately build anti-racist habits, so that we can move towards that mountain, right? We can move towards those larger actions. So in this sense, anti-racism is a way of being in the world. Every day there's an opportunity to undo the ties of racism. And so we're going to discuss what that might look like and how we might be able to do this on a kind of everyday basis.